Nintendo is a company that will always fascinate me. They release some of the most memorable games of the highest quality that stand the test of time. They also make a lot of dog crud and shoddy business decisions, one of which is Nintendo Switch Online. $20 a year, you get online play on Nintendo's horrible servers, cloud backup, and a library of NES and SNES games. And despite paying for the service monthly, I rarely use these. They're novel, but so lacking in charm and personality. That's a problem Nintendo has had since the Switch. Nintendo has had an amazing track record for UIs, with Wii channels, Warabara Plaza, the GameCube intro, the eShop. The Switch just has none of that. For the first time ever, a Nintendo console, the thing you bought to be quirky, feels like it has less personality than Sony and Microsoft's output. And thus, if I ever feel itching to play some old NES game, I usually turn to this little bugger. In 2016, Nintendo released a limited run of the NES Classic Edition. I got this one for my birthday in 2018, right before they went out of production. This was a miniaturized NES preloaded with 30 NES games and a ton of extra features for $60. This seemed like a steal until you went to buy it, realized Nintendo didn't make enough of them and resorted to emulation instead. But one thing this little adorable gremlin has that most emulators don't is a sense of personality. This thing is just brimming with love for itself. From the menus, the options for playing, and the overall quirkiness of it all, this is an easy pick up and play console. You plug in the HDMI and micro USB and the controller, press the power button, and you're on your way. There's no need for signing in to the Nintendo Network or downloading updates for your game. Man, back when the world made sense. Now, this was released when the Wii U was still in production, and by proxy, the Virtual Console. So, what was stopping you from just playing all these games on the VC? Well, for starters, the controller. The NES Classic Edition came with a recreated NES controller. I only have the one that came with the console, I'd never picked up another, but it was almost identical to the original, with only a few notable differences. The first is the D-pad. It's much smoother and less sharp than the original. It hurts less to play while still feeling intuitive. Definitely a change for the better. The second is the controller's port. This was the same as all the Wii and Wii U accessories from the time. So you could use the NES Classic controller on your Wii U's Virtual Console and even some other games, as well as your Wii Classic controller on the NES. And lastly, the cord. It's not long. The reasoning behind this seems sound. It's because the Switch games, you press the reset button on the console. It would get annoying if you were too far away from the console and had to get up from your beanbag every time you wanted to access your saves. But this is a way worse trade-off. Most TV setups, it's awful to be so close to the TV, like watching a movie in the front row of a theater. Nowadays, I just have this thing on my desk, so it's a million times more comfortable. But a while ago, I used these extension cords, so now I can play from my bed. And let me tell you, getting up to reset the game is virtually the same as getting up to change a disc, and nobody with a life had problems with that. The extension cords were easily the better option. Now, if you were in Japan with the Famicom Mini, whose cords were built into the system... But again, what's stopping you from just picking up one of these and using your Virtual Console to play Mario? Well, the emulation quality of these games is top-notch, much better than what the Wii U was offering. Not only were the colors more saturated, but the amount of options you had were unprecedented for the time. You could play in 3 visual modes. Pixel Perfect is where every pixel on screen is a perfect square. It's so sharp it hurts my eyes. 4x3 stretches out the pixels slightly to appear the way they did on most TVs way back when. While I think this is a little less painfully beautiful than the Pixel Perfects, it's easily the one I've played with the least, because the Classic had a CRT filter for its games, and that knocked it out of the park for me, applying scan lines to the screen to replicate old TVs. This is easily the one I've played with the most. I've heard others say it's hard to go back to, but I don't know, I think the filters makes it easier on the eyes overall and just looks more authentic. That being said, the sound on this thing isn't as crisp as the original, and with games like these... Yeah. The Classic also came with 4 save states for every game, and this is a miracle for these earlier games that didn't have save data. And did I mention this menu? It's so fun and original. Listen to the music! Now look at NSO's menu. The last reason to buy this over the Wii U's VC is that 30 games for $60 isn't at all a bad deal when they ran for $5 on the eShop. But that was it. There was no downloading other games from a server. You were straight out of luck if you wanted certain games. And for the most part, the games they included were great. but there were some notable shortcomings. DuckTales, Tetris, TMNT, NES Open, Contra, Castlevania 3, Wrecking Crew, Clue Land, and many Mega Man games save for 2 were absent. Heck, Earthbound Beginnings or the Lost Levels would have been welcome inclusions. So what about the games it did come with? Well, the Super Mario Bros. Trilogy, Legend of Zelda, Mega Man 2, Punch-Out! Not featuring Mike Tyson, Stark Tropics, and Tecmo Bowl, for the most part, all stand the test of time. There is some outdated level design and controls here and there, but for the most part, these are amazing games that made their mark in the video game world. These will keep you busy for a while. But as much as I like Stark Tropics, it didn't come with the note that the original came with. It did come with this poster, showing off a bunch of stuff that the Mini doesn't come with, but I'm not going to risk getting this wet. So, at some point, you'll be stuck if you're like me and don't like looking up guides. Super Mario Bros. All are fine and dandy, with 3 being one of the greatest games ever. I really like 2, even though I feel others would say this is the weakest of the 3. And 1 is just a really fun platforming game. Zelda 1 is great, it just takes a little bit of getting used to for the modern gamer. Mega Man 2 is amazing, easily one of the best aging games on the platform. I'm glad they didn't just go with the first one like they did Tecmo Bowl. I've heard Tecmo Super Bowl is the better of the 2, but hey, this game gets my only football game I seem to care about award, Punch-Out! Easily one of the best, trickiest, and all-out fun games out there. Even if Mike Tyson isn't in the game, come on, that's a fight most gamers will never see. These games are clear winners and have aged much better than everything else. But just because something hasn't aged all too well doesn't make it bad. The original Metroid, Kid Icarus, Castlevania, Kirby's Adventure, Zelda 2, Ninja Gaiden, Super Seed, Gradius, Final Fantasy, Double Dragon 2, and sure, Ghosts and Goblins, you can have this. A lot of these games are great, just hard, because that was the idea at the time. We can only make 5 stages, so we need to make sure our player spends an eternity getting through them. This applies for pretty much every game here except for Metroid and Kirby. Metroid was just a bit too ahead of its time, and the whole adventure feels underdeveloped. The lack of map especially hits hard, but the save states really help, and Kirby's Adventure is great. It just does not control well at all. The flying and copy abilities mechanics don't work for me. I know this was the second game, but I'm way too biased for the later control schemes. Kid Icarus is pretty alright. The level design isn't bad, more so it's physics. Pit just feels way too heavy to control, which is where most of the difficulty comes from. I'd argue that with different characters, this game would be much easier. Super C is cool. While it's weird that Contra hasn't been carried over, Super C is still a blast, easily one of the best 2-player games on the console. Still tricky, obviously, but really fun. The original Castlevania, man, I don't know why, but I find this game so iconic. The music, the attacks, the enemies, I don't know, I just have no reason to like this, but I love it. Especially since I really haven't played too much of the rest of the series. Maybe I should get around to Requiem sometime. Ninja Gaiden kind of feels like Castlevania, but with ninjas, cutscenes, and strange enemies spawning, and I think that's what kills it for me. But I still find it fun and incredibly impressive with those cutscenes, but Castlevania just feels like a more polished game otherwise. Gradius is a game that I love, but I'm so bad at. I've always been decent at bullet hells, and I find the upgrade mechanic really interesting, but I just can't get past these stupid volcanoes. Ghosts and Goblins, I get why this is here. It was a larger cartridge and revolutionary for the time, but everything here, Castlevania just does so much better. Castlevania feels more fair and fun and just kills my reasoning for playing this game. Zelda 2. This was a fun idea that I'd like to play, but some bizarre design choices, puzzles, and dungeons can really kill this game, which is a shame because I dig the gameplay style. I'd be down for a spiritual successor. Final Fantasy 1 sure is the first Final Fantasy. Very basic RPG for the console, but completely functional. Outside of not aging great, it does everything it needs to. Double Dragon 2, a co-op street beat-em-up, is pretty good multiplayer. Not quite on the same level as Super C, but probably the closest thing to Turtles in Time you got on this console. So, while I love playing these games, Super C and Castlevania in particular, if I were told to get to the end at gunpoint, I'd be in trouble. Except for maybe Kirby, I could probably beat that game and just hate myself in the end. Every game here either has really good ideas surrounded by Lion King monkey puzzles, or a good game where you control a corpse. Then there are all the arcade-style games, both ones you can find in an arcade and more traditional ones like Balloon Fight, Dr. Mario, Excite Bike, and Ice Climbers. I really don't hate Ice Climbers as much as everyone else. Yes, it controls and feels horrible, but I don't know, I think it's kind of goofy fun. It's not like there's a campaign as much as it is just climbing mountains. I think it'd be cool if there was a remastered with better controls or something. Balloon Fight is fun enough. Basically just Nintendo-flavored Joust. Excite Bike is weird. I can never figure out how to optimally play it. Am I having fun yet? Dr. Mario, I guess we couldn't get Tetris. And as far as I'm concerned, it's the same Dr. Mario you can play in Dr. Luigi on the Wii U. Take that as you will. As for the rest of them, most of these are just worse versions of arcade games. That wouldn't be so bad if I didn't live right next to one. Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr., these are missing levels, graphically look worse, and overall are worse. It also doesn't help that Donkey Kong 3 is my favorite of the trilogy. Mario Bros, same deals, missing some graphics, but still a fun time. Galaga, I just prefer Gradius. Pac-Man, I just prefer Gradius. Bubble Bobble is weird, it's so slow in comparison to the arcade version. Your rate of firing bubbles is just bogged down beyond belief. It's still functional, but But overall, these aren't bad at all. I'm completely open to playing any of them, but I'm also completely open to play any of them at my local arcade, where I can just also waste 9 nickels to play on Star Wars Pinball. Now, what I think is easily the worst game on the system is Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest. You can say that any other game on this list is bad, and I'll let you have that. You can say Simon's Quest is good, and I'd be concerned for you. It's a grindy, buggy, poorly designed mess that requires you to have bought issues of Nintendo Power to know what to do in order to progress. Even back in the era of kilobyte cartridges and insane difficulty curves, that is some bullcrap. And it's not all that different from live service games nowadays. Pre-order now to get highlights over all the walls with story progress behind it. Seriously, Simon's Quest laid the groundwork for today's horrible gaming practices. And it's so weird because we could have gotten Castlevania 3. It's not like they gave us Mega Man 1 because it was the original. What was the reasoning behind including this game? It's clear from the selection that they were much more concerned with showing off the history and foundation of these franchises than actually including its best games. They made some really smart moves with Mega Man 2 and Star Tropics, but they didn't include Ice Climbers, Balloon Fight, and Ninja Gaiden because they were the best. They included them because Ice Climbers were in Smash Bros, Balloon Fight is everywhere for some reason, and Ninja Gaiden is still around, I guess. That started out as this, isn't that amazing? But even so, Bubble Bobble? The game's fun, but more worth it than DuckTales or Battletoads? Battletoads is bullcrap, but at least it's fun. Or even Wario's Woods, the last NES game to be released in North America? And was it so worth it to put Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest on here? Seriously, Simon's Quest laid the groundwork for today's horrible gaming practices. Never mind, it totally makes sense. But calling this thing as some of its flaws would be a crime. Some of these games were revolutionary. We wouldn't have video games like we do today if it weren't for Super Mario Bros. And this is one of the best ways to play those true gems and some other blasts from the past. This was a very much left field move from Nintendo, and thus all eyes were on them for both future classic editions and the Switch was announced at this point. Talk of mini consoles from the 64 to the Virtual Boy became the talk of the town, but with the scarcity of this thing, it was clear that this was a collector's item and wasn't staying around for the long run, and eventually ceased development. But later in 2017, Nintendo announced something even cooler: the continuation of the NES Classic Edition and the SNES Classic Edition. I also got this thing for my birthday, like the same birthday. That was awesome. And I had no idea how much I wanted this one. It came out for $80 while bolstering 21 games, which on paper is a major step down from the NES's 1-2 price ratio. But SNES games were going for $8 on the eShop at the time, and weren't even available on the Switch yet. This was still a bargain. Not to mention, the SNES Classic just had several improvements from the NES Classic. Oh, sorry, improvements. For starters, the controller, or controllers, this one came with 2. It's pretty similar to the original controller, but the base material has been swapped out for this rougher plastic. Rougher may sound worse, but it gives the controller a sense of grip. I don't have an original to compare it to, so I can't really say what's better. But for once, Nintendo listened. An extended cord length. Nintendo is that one rock from Undertale. Outside of this port cover on the model itself, which, say what you want, I dig this, the outer workings of this console are pretty much identical otherwise. We even got another poster, except actually advertising what's on this mini console. But on the inside, this thing had a few extra features. And on top of a new menu that fits the 16-bit era and the same screen filters from before, we got frames for the side of our screen. Remember the Super Game Boy, which had both frames where you could customize and exclusive frames for certain games? Nintendo doesn't. I'm not holding back. These suck. What exactly is this supposed to invoke? Oh look, Simon Belmont in a city. Wood. Speakers. What the heck? Some change colors based on what's going on in the game. amazing. I almost never play with these frames. I actually think they're abysmal. Oh, say Jay, what kind of critic are you to let the interchangeable frames of a console ruin your experience? Look, Nintendo once made goofy fun borders for their games. They once had so many cool Easter eggs when it came to their consoles. These frames did not deserve advertising space. And they're ultimately ground zero for the ultimate lack of personality the Switch would end up with. But the Switch launched before this, and this was confirmation that things were not going to get better. And this doesn't ruin the console for me. Didn't you not like Puppy Playtime Chapter 3 because of a bunch of small, ultimately meaningless details that could be brushed aside as Marx was pulling hairs, but you ultimately let it ruin your initial experience? Yeah, but that's not what's happening here. I can turn these off and forget they exist. If that's the case, then why are you spending so much time talking about them? Good point, we're wasting time. With save states also returning, we got the first ever rewind feature on a Nintendo console. It's definitely the first. Really, if you're stuck, rewind and make a new save state. It's far better than rewinding every time. So, in conclusion, while the SNES Classic came with 2 controllers and slightly longer cords, the other added features were either basically useless or implemented horribly. And for $20 more, was this really any good? Holy Hannah, this game selection. Super Mario World, Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, Super Metroid, Yoshi's Island, Kirby Superstar, Final Fantasy VI, Secret of Mana, Super Mario RPG, Contra 3 Alien Wars, and Mega Man X are all competitors for the best in their series, and almost all better than their counterparts on the NES Classic. What can I even say? Super Mario World is a blast, even if I prefer Mario 3 slightly. I won't deny this may be a better game. Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past solidified the modern Zelda formula that lasted for years. While Metroid started the Metroidvania genre, Super Metroid solidified it and perfected it. Kirby Superstar is just so fun. I played this before Adventure, and I think that's why I don't love that one as much. Kirby controls and feels peak here. Except maybe Forgotten Lands, I'm yet to play a Kirby game that feels better than this one. Super Mario RPG, this thing is why I haven't gotten the remake yet. I get it. It's just fun. A goofy adventure that I, not the biggest RPG guy, can get behind. That's saying something. Yoshi's Island may be better than Mario World. It's easily the best looking game on here. Oh, there's that. 0 out of 10. Final Fantasy VI is notorious for its amazing story and improved RPG elements from the previous games. Secret of Mana is also an RPG I can get behind, being a real-time combat with co-op, though this was one of the few games that actually supported more than 2 players, so the selling part is kind of gone here, but it's still solid for both 1 and 2 players. Speaking of co-op, Contra 3. This is a bomb to play with a friend, or alone. It's a great side-scrolling shooter. Say what you want, I prefer Mega Man X to 2. This had some of the best of the best. While the NES Classic had some of the most iconic games, the SNES Classic had some of the most legendary. But we're not through yet. Just because they're not the greatest in their franchises doesn't mean these ones are bad, not at all. Earthbound, F-Zero, Super Castlevania 4, Super Punch-Out, Donkey Kong Country, Kirby's Dream Course, Star Fox, and Star Fox 2. Yeah, the first ever release of Star Fox 2 in the West. It was cancelled due to Star Fox 64 being on the horizon, but was brought back to the West for the first time ever with this little console. Add that to its resume. It's a super fun RTS space shooter with some elements that have appeared in the rest of the series. It can take some time to adjust to the polygonal graphics, but I personally love it. It can make the original Star Fox seem dull by comparison, but I think it still has merit. I enjoy the on-rail style as well. Earthbound is a cult classic and very easy to see why they brought it here. Though it does bring up the fact that there are 4 RPGs on this thing. You may think I hold that against it, but actually, I think I could have used 1 more. Kirby's Dream Course. Hear me out, I actually dig this. It's really the closest thing to a puzzle game we have on this thing. It's also super fun multiplayer-wise. Super Punch-Out is funky. The best word I can use to describe it as is cute. It plays much more like an actual boxing than the original game, which isn't bad, just isn't nearly as iconic. Donkey Kong Country. Yeah, everyone was shouting why not, like they didn't go for Mega Man 1 on the NES, but I don't think DKC is anything to scoff at. It's still a blast, even if not as revolutionary, and the great 2D platformer. Out of the 4 Castlevania games I've played, Super Castlevania 4 is easily the best. It just doesn't feel unfair, it's just challenging. Simon controls amazingly. This was when the combat of the series began to shine, with multiple ways to whip that could go and rotate in quick succession, and overall just major improvements. Maybe I should delve into the rest of the series, that'd be a good, I guess, video. F-Zero. This is a game I love way too much. The high speed and tight racing with the experimental graphics are awesome. This one is a little aged with how boosts are handled and knockout style racing, so I think Climax is just a little bit better, but I still love this one and highly recommend it. Toss it on the pile of videos for later. These games aren't the best in their series, but their entries on the SNES were either groundbreaking or just really, really great. Then there are two games that are just kind of questionable to me. The first is Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. This game is awesome, just kind of awful to play alone. It may just be me, but I cannot get past the stupid Indian yoga master. It's like fighting Psycho Manus. He can read my every move. But with a friend, this game is great. I won't deny that. You can call this S tier and I won't debate that, but I will debate Super Mario Kart. This, I get why it's here. There's just no reason to play it. Literally any other Mario Kart game is better, and if you're stuck with just this thing, you have F-Zero. Way better. So really, the only reason to bother with this one is if you want to play a two-player racing game and this is all you have. At that point, it's alright. But that brings up the multiplayer aspect of the system. Only 9 out of the 21 games included multiplayer, and one of them is Final Fantasy. Don't get me wrong, some of these are a blast to play with a friend, like Secret of Mana, Contra 3, and Street Fighter, but it's weird that this was the one that came with 2 controllers, whereas the NES had a lot more multiplayer games and only came with 1. There's also the Secret Yoshi's Island and Earthbound multiplayer. Give a darn. So, unlike the NES Classic, I understand 20 out of the 21 games included. I enjoy 18 of them, but what I can't understand is the inclusion of Super Ghouls and Ghosts. I tolerated Ghosts and Goblins on the NES Classic. This is only here because of such. This slot could have gone to any other amazing SNES games. And if it had to be continuation of one from the NES, Super Gradius, why not? So with that one exception, the selection of games for the SNES Classic Edition is truly exceptional. And it's kind of unfair. The SNES Classic isn't really better because, look, frames. It's better because, with the newfound capabilities of the SNES, they could expand the ideas from the NES into what they were always meant to be. They could play with superpower. You could take the 100 best Atari games and cram them into a microconsole. It won't be better than the NES Classic. Likewise, you could have all the games everybody says should be on the NES Classic, and the SNES would still probably be better. So, in the end, it's comparing cell phones to Walkmans. So, that was the SNES Classic Edition, something I never knew I needed. Now it was time for Nintendo to open the floodgates and begin development on the Nintendo 64 Classic Edition. In 2018, right after I got my hands on these things, it was announced that not only were the Classic Editions ceasing production, but no other plans for any new Classic Editions were in the works. This was because we were about to get Nintendo Switch Online, with its ever-growing library of NES and SNES games, and this just isn't the same. I probably sound like some stupid Gen Zer and everyone's yelling at me to play some original hardware like the pure mudneck I am, but Nintendo Switch Online somehow feels like a whole other level of depressing. Yes, it has many, but not all, of the games that were on the classics, plus much more. Yes, we eventually got more consoles, like the 64, Game Boy, GBA, and Sega Genesis. Yes, we got many of the features from the classics, like the view filter, save states, and improved rewind feature, but I don't know. This just feels like how McDonald's used to be a wacky shaped buildings and now it's just normal shaped buildings. It's like something that used to be known for being all out there has just stopped trying. Yeah, it's still the same food, but there's no more whimsy like there once was. But with these little buggers, the sands of time can be slowed, and thus my responsibility is avoided. I may not have been born in time for the great video game crash or to see what Sega does and Nintendo on TV. I may be spoiled for not having to write down passwords or not having to buy numerous issues of Nintendo Power to know how to beat Simon's Quest. And I may not be somebody who fills shelves upon shelves with pre-millennium games and the consoles they released on. But I can still appreciate these things. Little consoles filled with not only classic games, but also love.